VHS 85, directed by Scott Derrickson of Doctor Strange, The Black Phone, and Sinister fame, and David Bruckner of The Ritual, The Night House, and Southbound fame. So I had a very good bad time with this movie in the best way. I watched it while in the midst of fighting a sudden case of the cold along with a slight fever, because I'm dualistic like that. So there I was, and I had a giant headache and loads of congestion blocking up my airways that I am still fighting now, dear reader. So I apologize if you do hear me being a little extra nasally or a little more struggle bussy with my breathing. And not only that, I had also taken a little special gummy of medicine to top my movie night off, which all combined, I will say, led to me having a very fun and yet at times very nightmarish time with this movie. So let's start with some standouts from this movie. There are, I will happily report, more positives than negatives with this one. So first of all, the aesthetic / production design. There was lots of care and detail placed on capturing an authentic 80s feel here. I loved the tape glitches, loved the audio distortions, the grainy image quality. It really felt like the movie equivalent of a cozy vinyl record, funnily enough, and even reminded me of those documentaries that they would show to us in school with the monotone narrator and outdated editing. And it was just a really easy day. They rolled in the TV on the fucking whatever it's called, the trolley. It was just vibes. And with this movie, it really felt like you had popped in a genuine 80s VHS and you were watching some recorded over broadcast from TV. It felt like that feeling of waking up in the middle of the night to the most random thing playing on the television.
Imagine owning the world's greatest love songs.
And my favorite aspect of the look of this movie is that it felt like a real-world 80s aesthetic, not Hollywood 80s aesthetic. It wasn't exaggeratedly in your face about it, which kept the movie from veering fully into like a campier, unserious tone, and kept it in line with a way more realistic, grimy tone, which I will say is a nice compliment and segue for the second standout point, which is the horror / violence. Ah, yes, very much the thing we came here for, and also the thing that is much more than just blood, murder, and jump scares, mind you. The visual quality of this movie is an element that really amplified the feeling that you're watching something you shouldn't be watching. It really does end up feeling like you're watching some violent, forbidden midnight movie release of some smutty art house film that someone dug up from some dark, cold, wet basement, which works in the movie's favor on two levels here. Without going into too much detail, there are more out-of-this-world sorts of evils portrayed in this movie, and then there are also more reality-grounded evils portrayed in this movie. In the less realistic stories, the horror and brutality is of an out-of-this-world nature, which helps to balance out some of that smutty, dirty feeling you get watching something with this type of authentic presentation. And it also counteracts a little of the fear aspect that this movie does very well, thanks to its very presentation. So with the fear notch dialed down just a little, it allows for a little breather in tone. Like, get a load of this murderous tire, you know? It's cheeky, so out of this world that it lets it be entertaining and fearsome, which is a very good thing to have in a film like this, because on the other hand, there are some stories in here that do their setup extremely well, and that they feel very real and familiar and nostalgic and grounded, that you almost forget you're watching a horror movie, that you're watching something where you know some bad stuff is about to go down and you're really hoping it doesn't. And it's all building up. And then when the horror and brutality actually does come in, oh man. There were a couple of absolutely terrifying segments in this movie for me. Like, genuinely off-putting, under my skin, mind in a dark place, can't turn the lights off type shit. Times when the movie just doesn't turn away from showing you some stuff happen to people that you really don't want to see. But, again, that is what we came here for. And they get the horror correct here, for the most part, hitting more spots for me as a horror fan than I initially thought that they would. I even had a crazy thought that this one could be a cozy horror film for me, in that it's all this terrifying shit wrapped up in a very authentic, nostalgic feeling, well put together package. But man, then I think back to a couple of the segments in here, and like, I really shudder to think of rewatching them again. And now for the third standout point, the characters / world building. Like I said, much of the effectiveness here lies in the movie's ability to drop you straight into watching a long-lost 80s VHS tape. You know, this means the cars, the music, the set design, the clothing, the look of the world at large, remaining in line and faithful to the goal, which means, of course, the characters that populate that world. And again, without saying too much, this movie has characters within it who are performed very, very well. They did a great job casting a group of unknown actors and making them cease to feel like actors and blur into looking and feeling like real people operating in a real world. They really take advantage of that relatability factor, because I think for most of us, if you grew up with a large family or you grew up around a lot of people, we can immediately connect with the memories and feelings of watching various home videos. Or on a broader level, most of us can connect with the memories of VHS tapes in general, and VCR machines, and the technology that existed in that era of time. We can remember the types of media that people would have on tape, you know? It could be some random self-help seminar. It could be a workout video. It could be a language learning program. It could be a soap opera, a big sports game, a game show, a documentary, some obscure, never before seen or heard B-movie. Like, on and on, we can just remember the sounds that came with the experience. We can remember that little square display on the thick TV. We can reconnect to that past, which for me adds a little more twisted layer of flavor to my horror sandwich. It makes it feel a little more wicked that this is now being, you know, twisted into such a display of fear. I would not recommend watching this one alone unless it's daytime. I watched this at night with someone else in the house, mind you, and with the lights on, and this still put me in a bad place. and made me paranoid and fearful. So proceed with caution. If you think I'm exaggerating, the particular sequences that I'm talking about were directed by the people that did Sinister, so leave me alone. There's a lot to scream about there. But also, you might be right. It might have just been that little gummy of medicine that I took. And finally, for the positives, is editing. This should be a short segment, but I had to point out that I enjoyed the way that this movie cleanly and neatly put together its 5 differing stories in a way that flowed while still keeping the all over the place energy of a compilation intact. Sometimes we would get pieces of a story peppered throughout the film, out of order, and it was never clunky or disruptive. On the contrary, it made it all the more immersive in its imperfection. The editing was interesting and engaging. The camera work wasn't obnoxious or in the way, and it showed what it needed to show. It was honestly an element that I forgot about while watching the movie. When I initially popped it on, I had a thought like, oh yeah, this is found footage, I forgot. But the movie has other camera elements throughout that aren't your typical stereotypical shaky handheld approach. This movie, thankfully, took the time to be creative with the way that it implements its camera into these stories, which was very effective. More found footage movies could learn from this. Okay, and finally, my negatives, which is a very short segment. I, again, don't have many to speak of, especially as compared to some of the reviews that I was reading on Letterboxd. There were a couple of times some things could have been trimmed up here and there, but overall, this was a very well-paced collection. I heard a couple mentions of the disappointment that some people had with the second story in this movie, one that takes place in Mexico, which is all I will say. And while I do agree it's not the best at the end with its third act, the whole story before that felt very as above, so below meets Cloverfield for me. And I think that carried it despite its, middling end. So it's a bit of a hit. And the other observation is that there's a plot thread that's not really a plot thread, a loose one, that I would have liked to have seen play out a little more, because I got the impression there was a bit of continuity going on throughout the film with that particular story, but the thread just kind of stopped after a point. So I get the impression that the movie just kind of ended. Like its story, it showed us what it needed to show, and maybe I'm just being greedy by wanting to know if there was something else to that open-ended ending. Keeping that vague, but it's a very nitpicky thing, so it's hardly a hit. All in all, though, this movie is gonna get a 9 out of 10. It was a great October watch, and it makes me want to watch the other VHS movies, which I've heard mixed reviews on. Anyway, with all of that, I bid y'all a good night, and thank you.